This video explains variable costs versus direct costs. A lot of times if you do a Google search or if you went to college and you studied accounting, a lot of the examples are based on manufacturing. They're manufacturing examples or they're the production of some product. And so it can become confusing. There's a lot of interchangeable terms. So variable cost is a term that's used frequently, but more common in this industry is the use of direct cost. And so I like to talk in terms of direct cost instead of variable cost. You'll also hear, and you can watch my video on this, the term fixed overhead, but you'll also use another term that's interchangeable called indirect cost. So I'm going to go into a little bit of an explanation here, but let me first talk in terms of direct cost because we're going to use that term instead of variable cost. So direct cost is a cost that varies based on production. So as an example, if you win a design build job and you need to hire some contractors, you need to rent a dumpster or a ditch witch, or you need to pay out a sales commission, or you now incur some material costs such as plants, that is a direct cost that you only incur because you won that job. Had you not won that design build job or won that maintenance job, you would never have incurred the material cost or the permits or rentals. Therefore, it's a cost that, again, is only incurred when you win the work and when you perform the work. If you're looking at your profit and loss statement, this cost or these direct costs, they're going to appear under your revenue at the top of your report in the cost of goods sold section. So what you do is you look at your revenue generated for whatever time period your P&L is looking at. You subtract out of that revenue, your sales revenue, you subtract out of it your cost of goods sold, which are your direct costs, and that leaves you with your gross profit margin. Your direct costs are going to be one of your biggest expenses inside your business because your business is so labor intensive. Or if you're in the design, build, or construction side of the industry, materials is going to be a huge cost to your business, which falls under direct costs, which is part of cost of goods sold. And again, direct costs and variable costs are often used interchangeably when you're reading books, accounting books, or Google, or performing Google searches. Within this industry, the more common term is direct cost. Generally, what most people do is they take all of the other costs and they put them under fixed overhead or indirect cost. There really are some other variable costs in the business that oftentimes will get lumped into fixed overhead or indirect costs, but are truly variable. And so you have to figure out what the standard is for your business, what the standard is for this industry. I would recommend following the standard for this industry. So let me give you an example of what I'm referring to. So you could have what might be considered a variable cost by some, which would be website hosting or maybe marketing, because marketing in some sense could be considered a variable cost, meaning that if things aren't going well, you could shut off all of your marketing. You could say, let's stop running pay-per-click ads, let's stop sending direct mail pieces, let's stop putting out door hangers. And so that cost is somewhat variable. It's far easier to stop those types of marketing costs than it is to say we're going to exit our 3-year lease, or we're going to stop paying for truck insurance or stop paying insurance on our building. Those are fixed costs. You really can't exit those costs very easily, whereas marketing is an example of a variable cost. However, what you'll see oftentimes is that a lot of companies will look at their marketing expenditure for a period of time and they will put it into the indirect cost column on their P&L or the indirect cost section on their P&L. So what they do is they take gross profit margin, remember that's your direct costs minus your revenue, and that gives you your gross profit margin, and from that they subtract their fixed overhead and indirect costs. And oftentimes you'll see marketing or advertising is one of those costs that gets subtracted out. But I wanted to make the point that as you're reading and as you're thinking through what is a fixed cost versus a direct cost versus a variable cost, marketing is a great example of a cost that will fluctuate, and therefore it's somewhat of a variable cost. For example, you might have website hosting, as I am showing here. That's a marketing cost, but you can't really necessarily turn off your website and shut it all down. And so a lot of times that's very obviously a fixed overhead or an indirect cost, whereas pay-per-click, where you're paying for clicks in Google, you could shut that down by pausing your campaign in an instant, and that is more of a variable cost. The takeaway is that these variable costs you need to figure out and sit down with your accountant and pay attention to what's done in the industry and figure out if, even though there's some variability in that cost, as in my example of pay-per-click, it might make sense to follow industry norms or the recommendation of your accountant and simply lump that into what they call indirect costs. You might also hear the term sometimes called general and administrative costs. So those are some things to think about. The biggest one to focus on is universally in our industry, you will hear direct cost. That is the one you're going to hear the most, and direct costs are directly tied to the job. If you do not perform the job, the costs are not incurred. If you perform the job, the costs are incurred. And that's why they go into your cost of goods sold section on your profit and loss statement.